purpose.
Hello, welcome to Youth of Purpose, a show that is here to inspire you and give you a platform, majorly as young people, to be able to talk about issues that concern us as Ugandans, as young Ugandans, and put a brick to Uganda's development. Today on the show, we are going to be discussing basically how, as young people, we can be able to contribute to our country's security, our regional security, and also our continent's security. My name is Ivan Tumukunde. Welcome to the show. And today I have Manzi, I have Howard, and they are going to be helping us to delve in this discussion and make sure that we can be able to touch here and there to help you understand how, as a young person, as a youth, you can be able to play a role. The same way we used to see students' movements, youth movements in the early 60s, in the early 70s, being able to play a role in what happens in their countries and making sure that they take on the mantle to hold their leaders accountable, but also the continent to bring it together and make sure they serve the purpose of the continent and make sure that we have peace and security. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. It's always an absolute pleasure.
Say hello to the viewers.
Hello, viewers of UBC and all the viewers of the Purpose program. Thank you for being with us. My name is Mujisha Emanzi, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. Once again, I would wish to say I'm grateful to be here to discuss matters of national and regional importance.
Thank you so much. So basically, starting with you, Emanzi, take us through the aspects of peace and security in the local, regional, and continent perspective.
Well, for starters, when we talk about the aspect of peace and security, we are not necessarily only talking about the absence of war, but we are talking about peace in its entirety, starting from my security, moving where I'm going, anybody's not going to touch me, cyber security, ensuring that nobody's going to go on my account and siphon money from there, things like digital security, biosecurity, because now we have been lately attacked by things we don't understand, like the COVID-19, which is probably assumed to be another biosafety security issue. So to me, when we talk about the aspect of security, it's very pertinent to me as a youth, because I know that for every society to evolve at its foundational level, it has to be the foundation based on peace and security, so that people can work, young people can go and study, farmers can go and do their business, and all this. So to start with Uganda, apparently, if you look at the East African region, Uganda is one of those countries that suffered with war, or what we could call political instabilities actually, from the 1960s to the mid-2000s. When we had insurgency after the other, a coup after coup, and then we had rebels, and that, of course, hindered the pace upon which Uganda could have been progressing. Because if you compare our development level by 1960 compared to other countries like, say, Singapore, you can see that we were at the same pace then, but because of these instabilities, we were set back. And every time you're set back, it takes much more effort for you to bounce back and develop your country. So with Uganda, we see that even when we were having those various instabilities in the 1960s, going forward, there is a certain group, let me call it a demographic dividend, of young people who stood and said, we've had enough. We can actually change our country, but we have to be intentional. So these young people mobilized themselves, and among them, if my memory serves me right, we had the then young Elia Kategayas, the General Yoweri Musevenis, the Idandi Salis, the Amanya Mushegas, the Chirunda Chiveidinda, the Professor Nabuderes now then of the time. They were young people in their early 20s. So they said, no, we cannot sustain this. They sat down, devised means upon which they wanted the future of their country to be hinged upon. And we can see these people after some time, they engaged or contributed in guerrilla struggles in Mozambique, got trainings, and came back, ushered in the protracted People's War, And after the 1986, we had what we call relative peace. Yes, of course, other insurgencies happened, but they've been neutralized. But now, that is one aspect, one side of the coin. The other flip side of the coin is, after that generation, like Ivan mentioned initially, young youth movements from the universities, from the communities, they galvanized themselves and spoke with one voice. Now, the youth of my day, I don't know what language we are speaking yet, because we are very divided on the basis of ideology, on the basis of ethnicity, on the basis of political orientation. So, and I think this is where we have to interrogate this and see where do we go from here.
Thank you so much, Howard.
Pleasure.
What's your perspective in as far as peace and security is concerned, both on local and continental level?
Just like my comrade has highlighted, we also need to look at peace in a broader perspective. We also need to look at aspects like food security, cyber security, education systems, participation, protection of the young people in the peace processes. Because ideally speaking, there is no way how you could as well talk about peace without bringing young people and women on a drawing board. And in most cases, whenever peace building processes are trying to take shape, they normally forget the young people and women in the due processes. And yet, at the end of the day, the young people are always at the center of the peace. I mean, conflict, yes, in conflict resolution processes. So I have a feeling in most cases, I think it's key. It's key in most cases if young people are brought on a drawing board and capacitated in terms of some of these international treaties like the UN Security Council resolution processes, something of that kind. Thank you.
So it brings about the issue of young people being engaged and brought on table. And something comes into my head that basically, how much are the young people involved in peace and security making processes? How are young people involved? Because we are looking at 78% of a population. That means if we're going to have any kind of security, there is no way this percentage is not going to be involved.
Yes.
Either they will be part of the cause, or else they will be the other side, so much of the other side, of the victims.
Yes.
And I want us to start from the local aspect. For example, if we look at almost the 20 years that we talked about, from 86, it's almost time lost, not just because of the war, but you cannot be able to start up a business anywhere. And basically looking at, for example, our brothers and sisters from the north, where even after 86 we had the rebel. Yeah, it really takes away that liberty that you can be able to be creative as a young person. You can be able to be creative as a Ugandan, to have a thought of putting up something permanent, building up a business. It's almost impossible. So it doesn't matter, as young people will be affected in all the ways. And I asked, how are we involved as young people in these peacemaking processes? The fact that we are always affected by the absence of peace.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. And it actually reminds me of a quote by a certain Russian general during the First World War who made a statement. His name was Petrichenko Vladimirovich. He said that it is the old men who declare war, and it is the young people that go and fight and most likely die. So if I'm trying to correlate the question vis-a-vis that quote, it is very saddening to notice that when the order to go to war or for war usually comes from the elite class, the politicians, but it is the young officers who go to fight. And like you said, you can either go as a fighter or as a victim. Now I want to hinge my analysis on the victim part. Every time there is a war in a country, community, or society, the biggest casualties are youth children and women. Why? Because they're the most incapacitated physically. How many kilometers can a woman run? Sure, carrying a baby and food. You see these things when they're fleeing from, say, war-stricken countries like the DRC, South Sudan, you know. Secondly, these children that are running around, they are being denied the opportunity to education, to life, to harmonious living, to grow up in a stable family with the fathers and mothers. But to go back to your question, how are the young people engaged in the processes? Let us look at the African Union Agenda 2063. And I think it is Goal 2, which talks about comprehensive peace and silencing the guns in Africa. Actually, that was the theme of the African Union in 2019, silencing the guns. Why? Because until the guns are silent, we cannot have a firm foundation upon which to build our economies and also foster other aspects like democracy, participation, human rights, among others. My question is, when they were formulating the African Union Agenda 2063, and one of the goal number 2 was to silence the guns and have a harmonious continent and peaceful, what were the deliberate actions that were taken by the African Union to engage the young people, not as beneficiaries, but as participants in the process? I want to tell you, my brother, young people were only consulted on a high level meeting status only. Young people in my village do actually not know that there is a document called the African Union Agenda 2063, which is the blueprint upon which Africa hinges its development, infrastructure development, peace and security, democracy, energy development, sustainable development, among others, for the next 50 years until 2016. But young people were minimally engaged, and I think this is where the problem comes from, for starters. After African Union, let's come back to the region. The East African community has yet to have a formal structure where they engage young people, especially in aspects of peace and security. For example, we have the East African Youth Network. It has an affiliation with the East African Secretariat in Arusha, where they have conversations with the Secretary General, which is structured annually and sometimes quarterly. But also, personally, I'm not convinced or satisfied with the amount of engagement, because these engagements, comrade, they involve things like resources. Many a time, our countries do not put aside budgets for that. So we find ourselves waiting for donors, right? But until when are we going to wait for donors to come and help us do our own things that fight for the interest of the African child? I think it is high time that we engage young people meaningfully, more strategically, and purposefully in these processes from the grassroots.
Thank you so much, Manzi. We are going to go in for a short break. When we're back, I'm going to be speaking to my colleague here to also be able to bring us up to speed in as far as how young people are getting involved in helping to stabilize Africa. We're having a lot of wars right now in Africa. Very many countries from North Africa to West Africa. Where do we see the young people playing a role in making sure that Africa is stable? We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching Youth of Purpose, a show that is here for you, the young people, to be able to contribute to your country's development. And today, we are talking peace and security. How, as young people, we can be able to contribute in making sure that we have peace and stability in our country, Uganda, but also in our region, East Africa, and also as the continent, Africa. Coming to you, comrade, he talks about the fact that all these instabilities do affect us as young people. And someone might say, okay, it's the young people that are so much, recruited into the army, because priority is given to those young people who are still energetic, those who have at least attained some average education. So someone might say, okay, the people that are in the army, basically, are the young people. And as you said, they will be the ones fighting, but they are fighting on whose orders?
Thank you.
So I want us to, for example, look at the issue that is happening right now in Sudan. to old, I want to say old generals. I don't know who have completely lost control, who have their personal issues, personal disagreements, but they completely destroy the future of a nation. They are destroying infrastructure, the factories, bombing almost everything they come across just because of their personal interests. But who are they using? It's the young people in the army. We go to Congo. The wars that are happening, who are fighting?
It's the young people.
It's the young people being commanded by the old minority, who in the next 50 years might not be here. And therefore the cost will definitely come back to us. If we are to go back and build Sudan the way it was, it will take us centuries. The same way, if for example we'll be having the opportunity to work out Congo, it will take us another 100 years. So it's basically us, the young people, that will have to pay the cost. And my question is, the movements you're talking about, the East African whatsoever, where are they? You're talking about the young people here in Uganda going to Mozambique to be trained. Which country do we have right now speaking? A group of young people, a movement of young people, speaking against what is happening in Sudan, what is happening in South Sudan. Where are the young people? Even the ones that we have in parliament, where are they? The African Union you're talking about, the youth wing, where is it? I haven't heard anywhere where they are coming out to speak against what is happening. What can we do as the young people to make sure that there is peace in our countries? And looking at those examples that I've given.
For beginners, I would wish to point on two particular concerns. It comes to one, that is programming and participation. In most cases, young people are normally brought on a drawing board as beneficiaries, but they are not brought on a drawing board during the programming. I could equally say programming of those wars in courts. Like how my comrade Mugisha had somehow highlighted in some of those dynamics of the peace processes, the young people participating and the old people maybe issuing orders. In most cases, the young people are not, it first comes to education. When they are programming, they normally say, young people are the problem. Young people are not, they have not gone to school. Young people don't know anything. But I think, like you were saying, it's high time we could use young people as a tool of better organization.
First of all, we already have young people, because the complaint previously was that young people are not given the opportunity. We are now there, we are in parliament. Even at the East Africa, the regional level, we have the youth wing there. Even at African Union, we don't have them. Why are they not speaking out?
The reason why I'm saying participation and programming, one, we could be having representatives in the national youth parliament, in the national parliament, at the regional parliament, be it the Pan-African parliament, but the question is, are they participating meaningfully? Or it's just mere participation? Because when you're talking about meaningful participation, you have to talk about programming first. When most of these programs are being brought or they're about to come into the due process, are they brought on a drawing process during the programming processes, or they are simply brought on a drawing board as beneficiaries to participate, to get their views? That is equally a big problem, because we equally need to have a look at, we equally need to know the difference between programming and participation. Because then too, when we are talking about programming and participation, we equally need to look at things like, capacity building. Are the young people well empowered enough to participate in some of those platforms? Or it is simply a question of bringing someone's son on a drawing board and say, this person can fulfill this position, and they equally need to be empowered. We have the National Youth Councils on a drawing board. We have youth civil society organizations, but the question is, are some of those platforms well empowered to participate in those programs? Because at times there is a question of occupying the position and being well empowered enough to participate meaningfully. Because young people cannot participate meaningfully if they are not empowered. So it's a question of empowerment. We equally need to look at the question of empowerment. And in most cases, that is why
Who is going to do the empowerment?
I think it's a question of organization. I think that is a debate of another day, because
Going to organize.
because we equally need to look at the organization and education, because young people need to be organized first and then educated. Because as we talk about the East African Youth Network, the National Youth Councils, the AU Youth Envoy,
Is who organized the Kategayas?
Very good.
They organized themselves.
How they respond to
And
needs.
for you, you are there saying they have to organize us, they have to educate us, they have to empower us for what? Because if for example in Sudan, the people who have started the war, they are the ones you expect to come and empower you, then you're totally misplaced. Honestly.
Maybe to interject on that, that's a very critical question of who should organize you. For me, I think this question of who should organize us should not come from externally. Our needs as a demographic dividend, as a generation, we should build consensus from within ourselves to say that, well, look, young people, when we look at the statistics, apparently, we the young people are the ones that are used many a time for kavuyo, right? So, how do we address this issue? Myself, my brother, and I think even Ivan, we're on different platforms that are non-formal. Nobody organized us, but we galvanize ourselves, right? Using the tools that we have at hand that our forefathers did not have. Like WhatsApp, Twitter, and we form these groups. These groups are basically formed to create consensus, to generate consensus, and we know. And these groups are not just for Uganda. We get youth from all over Africa. Himself, he has a group that he runs under the auspices of the African Youth Federation. He has membership from across the entire African continent and the Caribbean. So to me, that is the starting point of who should. The response is we have the capacity because we have the tools, and we don't necessarily need the endorsement of the powers that be.
That's what we need to understand.
Yes, yes.
Amazing. So basically, we are trying to solve something that actually we don't understand. Because if you say wars, insecurity, how are we going to play a role before we even understand what is the cause of these wars? Why is there insurgence of wars in African countries? President Museveni talks about just and unjust wars, and he describes them from the 60s to the early 90s. He says those wars in Africa were just wars because basically we were fighting imperialism. We are fighting for our freedom. But then the wars that we are seeing in Africa today are unjust wars. What is the cause of these unjust wars?
Thank you for that question. These unjust wars, as General Museveni terms them, in my humble opinion, I think they could be sprouting from an array of issues, and I would like to throw 2 or 3 that I think could be. Firstly, the general political terrain of the new Africa has changed. And when I mean the terrain has changed, this is what I mean. Initially, those justified wars, right, were fought on the basis of we want our freedom, we want self-governance, right? Now, after that, now we've got the self-governance, as is apparently. Now the issue is about the real politics of allocation of resources and power struggles. Most of these are hinged on what I want to term as petty issues. Difference in political ideologies, right? Secondly, it could be on ethnic grounds, like we've seen in some groups in, say, the South Sudan.
Which all goes back to ideological disorientation.
Ideological disorientation, indeed. Now, when you look at the war, apparently that is in Sudan, it is, to me, it is a proxy war, where one group that subscribes to the West and another that subscribes to the East. Yes, you get? And so, these proxy wars.
Then non-aligned.
Yes, the non-aligned members are vis-a-vis the aligned members. The dynamics have changed because now, initially, if I wanted to to oust you from power. You're the president, right? I had to mobilize my people, right? Get a friendly country to me. Probably if I'm Muslim, a Muslim country, or if I'm Christian, a Christian country, they would train me, give me resources, and come and But now, because Uganda, we have oil. Everyone is looking at us. They want a share of that. China is, and the entire West is. So you find that the triggers of these wars, we don't have much control over them. But the multinational corporations, in my thinking, must be having a hand in this, because when you look at some of the arms that are being used in Sudan and in Congo, these arms, we know where they are manufactured, we know who delivers them, and we know who gives these people ammo.
And we know who supports which other
Yes,
side.
which camp.
Perfect. I'll give each one of you only 30 seconds to conclude on what role as young people can be able to play to encourage stability on this. Starting with 30 seconds.
What can be done to encourage stability and peace? To me, in my opinion, I think integration is the answer, because East African integration will provide strategic peace at the end of the day. So integration is the answer.
Thank you. Hopefully, we will not just be integrating our problems.
Well, I know there is no silver bullet to this problem, but my 2 cents would be: let us build the spirit of Pan-Africanism. Let us reignite that spirit of Pan-Africanism, knowing that a war in Sudan is like a war in my backyard. Because as a trader, I won't sell there my product, so that means I will be poor. And when I'm poor, I'll be tempted to go to war and fight another person to take their resources. So Pan-Africanism, let's all be our brothers keepers.
Good. For me, as young people, we need to start counting the cost. Every decision that we make today, all the decisions that are made and we are not part of, there is a cost that is going to be paid. And most probably, you're going to have to pay it. If you miss it, your children are going to pay it. And therefore, you should not take these things for granted. To say things of peace and you're not playing a role as young people is for the elderly. You have a responsibility as the young people to keep these nations, to protect our countries. And also we need to understand that politics, for example, of identity, will not take us anywhere. Because most of these wars are basically because of differences between people, and those are baseless wars just because of ideological disorientation. And therefore, if we are able to use diplomacy, sit down, what do you believe in? What does he believe in? What do I believe in? And where is our meeting point? We can avoid all these unnecessary wars, because the cost is immense. In war, everyone is a loser, definitely. And therefore, let's look at having our interest first. Identity comes later. Actually, we should use our identity to have the strength to work together as Africans, to work together as Ugandans, to make sure that peace and stability prevails in our communities for economic development and for our continent to become great. I thank you so much for watching this show. My name is Ivan Tumukunde. Follow me on all my social media platforms at I_Tumukunde. See you next time.
Youth of Purpose.